Now on Outside the Lines, first report.
Outside corner, strike three. Well, he just made that look easy with a capital E.
Brandon Webb still perfect with a capital P, but which hot starters are sure to fade, and who will heat up by summer? Marvin Harrison shows up at Colts practice, but doesn't participate. We'll tell you why. 2 NBA playoff games tonight. Our experts break down the breakdown of the road team.
I think the lowest moment was when I realized it was 8 bells, and just dealing with the fact that, that it was all over.
And in our centerpiece, why the fall of one horse might doom horse racing forever. Now on Outside the Lines.
And now, sitting in for Bob Lee, Steve Bunin.
What once shocked baseball fans into a frenzy no longer raises even an eyebrow. Like it or not, and it appears most baseball fans do, the 12th edition of interleague play begins tonight. As always, the Subway Series and battle for bragging rights in LA will dominate the headlines and highlights. But perhaps the most intriguing matchup this weekend pits Tampa Bay against St. Louis, two of the true shockers of 2008. A quarter of the way through the season, the Rays have the best record in the American League. Arizona has the best record in all of baseball. Last night, the Diamondbacks finishing off a sweep of Colorado. Brandon Webb wasn't at his best, but he still beats the Rockies to become the first starter to jump out of the gate 9-0 since Andy Hawkins in 1985. A quarter of the way through the season, the Rays and Marlins, yes, baseball in Florida, they're on top of their divisions. Cardinals and Astros are surprise contenders with Chicago in the NL Central. And even with a 4-game losing streak, Oakland is just a half game out of first in the AL West. Baseball insider Tim Kirkshin joining us now on Outside the Lines. You've got Colorado, the defending NL champs, 11 games out in the NL West. What is your biggest surprise, good and bad, early in the season?
Well, the biggest surprise good is the Marlins. When you look at the $20 million payroll, you look at a team that most people, including myself, picked to finish last in the division, and here they are first in the division. That is pretty stunning. They're doing it with home runs. Only the Phillies have hit more home runs than the Marlins have. And it's a really amazing story. They're so young. They're so young, in fact, that Luis Gonzalez, the old guy on the team, told me that he went to 20 Marlins on the bench the other night and said, "Who is that guy standing next to the batting cage?" And 18 of the 20 didn't know who he was, and that guy was Jim Palmer. As for the most disappointing team, boy, there are a lot of those. I'm going to still take the Tigers. They're in last place in their division, and when you look at the way they've swung the bats, they've been shut out 6 times this year, which is ridiculous. I didn't think they'd be shut out 6 times all season. They have bullpen issues. They have infield defense issues. I'm not sure they're going to get back in this in a big way with the way that they're playing right now.
Of all the slow starting teams in the majors, which might be the tortoise and which of those fast starters might actually be the hare?
Well, I have to think that the Yankees, who have started so poorly and are in last place this late in the season for the first time since 1975, they have to get going at some point. And I got to think when A-Rod and Jorge Posada come back, they'll start to swing the bats a lot better and get back into this thing. As for the quick starter that's going to absolutely fall at some point, it's still, sorry, it has to be the Marlins. I mean, they just don't have enough pitching. They're just not old enough to pull this off, especially in a division that's pretty darn good.
Lance Berkman and Chipper Jones among the guys tearing the cover off the ball, but they're all-stars every year. We expect that. Who are your biggest surprises individually, good and bad?
Well, the biggest surprise good, of course, is Cliff Lee of the Indians. He's made 7 starts. He's allowed 4 runs this year. In 7 starts, he's allowed 2 run-scoring hits the whole season. It's phenomenal. 4 walks, 44 strikeouts. He has gone from a good pitcher to a terrible pitcher to the best pitcher in baseball, all in a 4-year span. And apparently he's doing that with just locating his fastball a lot better. As for the biggest disappointment, again, there are a lot of people in that category. Andrew Jones still is way up there, 182, 2 home runs, 7 RBIs. And the problem here is they were really counting on him to be the last piece, the guy that was going to give them the home run bat that they didn't have last year. Clearly, he has not been that guy. He has really struggled in every way at the plate, but mostly against fastballs. Going into yesterday's game, he was hitting 131 against fastballs, and that's not a good sign for a guy who's struggling.
And maybe the biggest change of all, homers are down 13% this season. Tim Kirkchen, we appreciate the time on Outside the Lines. See you on Baseball Tonight at midnight Eastern.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank God we get to go back to New Orleans for Game 7. So said Chris Paul after his Hornets got whacked by 18 last night in San Antonio. Thankful as he may be, he shouldn't be shocked. Road teams are now 1-20 in the NBA's conference semifinals, a winning percentage of less than 5%. In part, that's because all the top seeds advanced out of the first round. The better the seed, the better bet they are to beat any team at home, even a team seeded better than themselves. The 20-1 home team record in this round bumps the NBA home court advantage up to 77% this postseason, but even with that, it still isn't as big an edge as home field in the NFL over the last 10 years in the playoffs. Hockey and baseball fans far more likely to see the home team go down in the postseason. To break down the road team's breakdown in the NBA playoffs, we bring in ESPN.com Page 2 columnist Scoop Jackson. Is it so bad that the home team keeps winning? Doesn't that give us Game 7s eventually?
I would think so. You know, I like the fact that home teams are winning consistently in the NBA, you know, especially in the second round where that's what's going on and that's the pedigree. But and it makes the regular season relevant. That's also good. But at the same time, some of the blame has to be placed on the teams going so flip-flop because it's not like close games they're winning on the road. It seems consistent that 2 different teams show up. One shows up at home and one shows up on the road. So that's the bad part of what's going on right now.
The Lakers did have an overtime loss in Utah. They're back in action tonight in Salt Lake City. The Jazz 1 win from going home, and they've been the best home team in the NBA all season long. Who's the X factor in your mind for L.A. to pull off a win in Salt Lake City tonight?
I think Lamar Odom has to be consistent, you know what I'm saying, in order for them to win, because he's been the one answer that he's been the one problem that Utah doesn't have an answer for, because he can kill you in so many ways on the court. Of course, there's Kobe. You know, I'm a big fan of Derek Fisher, so I'm thinking if Derek Fisher is giving you points, then that's good for you. They still haven't found a real answer for Paul Gasol, but if I had to pick one, once again, X factor, I go with Lamar Odom. Even though they have lost a game when he's playing well, I still think he can be the difference maker in the game because of all the things that he can do.
The Celtics and Cavaliers go back to Cleveland. Boston's the first team in history to finish with the best regular season road record and then start the playoffs with 5 straight losses. What do they have to do to steal one in Cleveland and end this series tonight?
That's a good hope that you know that Cleveland team that showed up before doesn't show up this time. You know, I hope they're thinking that the Cleveland team that showed up in the last game on the road shows up right now, and the fact that maybe they don't adjust to Daniel Gibson not being there, that Damon Jones and that Sasha Pavlovich and that Wally Szczerbiak don't start hitting from the outside to fill the role of Daniel Gibson not being there. That's what they have to hope for. But once again, what Boston team is going to show up? They haven't even been close to winning games on the road. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier. Teams going on the road are not just losing short, you know, small ending games. They are losing by large numbers. And Boston has been the epitome of what's happening to teams on the road. So to me, it's not about what Boston could do to Cleveland. It's what Boston could do to themselves. How are they going to rectify this situation on the road to make them a better team, to not only win the Game 6, but to further themselves to this championship that they built this team to win?
And those NBA Finals might not begin for a long time. We've got a long layoff in the Spurs-Hornets series. It's going to be 3 days between Game 6 and 7, which is Monday. And if the Celtics wrap up tonight, they'll start the Eastern Conference Finals against Detroit before the West is even done. If that becomes a sweep, then whoever comes out of there is going to have an even longer layoff. If the Western Finals goes to 7, what would you say to the schedule makers if you had them right in front of you right now?
Well, I don't know, because I understand that David Stern and the NBA want to make sure that we see and appreciate every game that comes in, that every game has their own small entity. So I understand that philosophy, and it stretches it out a little bit. But like, let's take the New Orleans Hornets and the San Antonio Spurs. I think this 4-game or whatever game layoff works for them because, one, it gives New Orleans time to heal from an injury standpoint. It also gives, from the old situation, the age situation with San Antonio, a time to get rested. So we're going to see those 2 teams playing at their best in that game. But for a situation where a team like Detroit and Boston, or whoever wins, let's say, winds up waiting, I don't know how that does, and I don't know what happens to the television ratings when you have an audience at this peak and then they drop off. That gives them time to find something else and lose interest in the series. So the schedule makers need to find a happy medium between giving teams time to rest, what's the best for them, and you getting the best of them when they do play, as opposed to losing your audience because of so much time left.
Right, ironic they're trying to build up the audience by giving each game, like you said, its own little globe. And then it goes so long between games you can lose that. All right,
brilliance can come back and bite you sometimes, and that's when we would have.
Got that right. Scoop Jackson, we'll see you on ESPN Family Networks throughout the weekend. Thanks.
No problem. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me, man.
Tonight on ESPN, both playoff games. You got the Celtics and Cavaliers to start, and then the Lakers and Jazz to follow. NBA playoffs tonight on ESPN. Right now on ESPN.com, we're asking you to get involved. Tell us which NBA series has the best chance of a road team winning. Out in the East or out in the West? Lakers and Jazz, Spurs and Hornets. Go to ESPN.com, click on the Outside the Lines link. You can vote in our polls. Send us your emails and comments. We encourage you to get involved in Outside the Lines. Ahead in our centerpiece, the aftermath of 8 Bell's death.
I read an email. It was just the meanest, nastiest thing about, don't you have enough money? It's all about the money. Horses should be free to run in the fields and with the sun on their face. It was just plain ignorant.
And next, the judgment comes on this man's appeal to race in the Beijing Olympics, while Marvin Harrison avoids the media and the field at Colts minicamp. At this hour on Outside the Lines, double amputee sprinter Oscar Pistorius wins his appeal for the right to compete for a spot in the Beijing Olympics. The 21-year-old South African does have to qualify for the individual 400 meters, his specialty, but he can be picked for the relay squad without qualifying. A judge today sentencing Olympic gold medalist Tim Montgomery to nearly 4 years in prison for his part in a fake check scheme. The 33-year-old was banned from track and field 3 years ago for doping and still faces drug dealing charges in Virginia. The NCAA is in contact with Lewis Johnson, the man who accused O.J. Mayo of accepting $30,000 of improper benefits on Outside the Line Sunday. Johnson's attorney says the former member of Mayo's entourage will cooperate with the NCAA. Today, for the first time since being linked to a shooting, Marvin Harrison appears at a Colts practice. Because of his knee injury, he didn't do any drills, but the incident 2.5 weeks ago in Philadelphia was still the center of attention in Indianapolis.
Didn't have a whole lot of reaction to it because I hadn't talked to anybody, personally about it. I hadn't heard. I had text messages from friends or whatnot, but I hadn't talked to Coach Dungy or hadn't talked to Marvin. And I've been around long enough until I hear from somebody that truly knows what's going on, I don't give it a whole lot of merits.
The worst thing is you don't want a guy who's has a reputation that he has for so many years in the league to get tarnished over something that he really had no control over, and hopefully that's what will end up coming out.
We don't want to have any problems. We've had some. Marvin's situation has been in the paper. We'll see how that plays out, and when all the facts come out, we'll address those.
NFL owners might opt out of their existing labor agreement with players as soon as Tuesday. It is not expected to have any significant impact on the next 2 NFL seasons, and the Players Union says it's expecting the move. Our own Chris Mortensen broke the news earlier this afternoon, and he joins us now with the latest. Mort, what are the odds this is actually going to happen by Tuesday?
Well, I was told by one management source it's highly likely that it will happen and that we should almost expect it, although it's not a lock. The owners are going to meet in Atlanta on Tuesdays. There's actually going to be committee meetings on Monday, and they'll have a full discussion among some other business, but right now, they're expected to go ahead and opt out. The deadline for them to opt out of the agreement was November 8th. They could have waited till November, but they're choosing that now. And as you mentioned, wouldn't affect the 08 and 09 season from a fan perspective. 2010 would be interesting. It would be the last year of the agreement now. Uncapped year. Free agency would go to 6 years. There would be no draft after 2011. And all those things are generally designed to motivate both parties to come to another agreement. But there is a looming battle.
So if I'm a fan watching at home, what does this news mean?
It just means you're probably going to have to put your fingers in your ears or close your eyes to a lot of rhetoric about what will or won't happen. The union and Gene Upshaw's executive director says there's not going to be any givebacks in this deal. They clearly got the best of the owners in this latest agreement. The players are making more money than ever. not going to be any give-backs. We could decertify as a union again. I think it's really not going to affect, well, I know it's not going to affect the impact of the game for the next 2 seasons. It's just going to be a headache, I think, for some fans to have to listen to.
Chris Mortensen reporting for Outside the Lines. Next in our centerpiece, what 8 Bell's death changes about horse racing for those in and outside the sport.
I'm sorry that people feel like they have to try to point fingers and try to look for the negative of this game.
On the eve of the Preakness, why perception and reality might never again cross paths in the sport of kings. Next on Outside the Lines. One day before the Preakness, horse racing gallops back into the spotlight. But it's not all roses and bravos for the sport of kings. Equine aficionados prefer to focus on Big Brown's bid to become the 11th horse in 30 years to win the first 2 legs of the Triple Crown, the first since the Disco era to win all 3. But the majority of the viewing public continues to be bewildered at how 5 horses in the last 10 major races have had to be put down on the track. As Janine Edwards reports, 8 Bell's collapse at the Kentucky Derby may change the sport forever. Janine Edwards reporting. Legendary horse racing writer and now ESPN.com contributor William Knack joining us now. And William, you've got a column up on ESPN.com right now. I want to read you one part of it and then have you expound on that. Breeders are either oblivious or think it's inevitable, you wrote. But what is really inevitable is that every time a Barbaro grinds a limb to a pulp, every time a Pine Island dies at the Breeders' Cup, every time an 8 Bell's death destroys the joy of a Kentucky Derby, we lose another chunk of what little fan base we have left. How did it impact you as a lifelong fan of the sport?
Well, it's very sad for me. I started covering the sport in '72, and some of the most vivid memories I have, aside from Secretariat's great triumph from the Triple Crown and some truly spectacular Breeders' Cup races, is a growing number of catastrophic breakdowns that I've witnessed over the years, beginning most terribly with Ruffian's death on July 6, 1975. The fastest filly I ever saw broke down on the racetrack 2 sesamoids and had to be destroyed that night after surgery failed. And then they did start to blend together. I mean, there was Union City in the Preakness of '93, Prairie Bayou, the Preakness winner, in the Belmont of '93. There was Gopher Juan taking that terrible fall in mid-stretch in the Breeders' Cup after she broke her sesamoids. Charismatic broke down. He was safe for the stud, but he broke down at the end of the Belmont when he was running for the Triple Crown. And it just goes on and on. George Washington breaking down recently. Pine Island in the Breeders' Cup broke down on the backstretch and had to be destroyed.
So what's different about the sport from the heyday of the 70s when, as you mentioned, Secretariat, Seattle Slew, Affirmed, they won 3 Triple Crowns in a 6-year span, and we didn't seem to see horses going down like they do now. What's changed?
Well, I think what's happened is that, I'm not saying anything about 8 Bells in this regard, but there's been an increasing use of drugs, I think, which tended to allow horses to stress themselves more. And that pressure breaks them down. And on the other hand, I think one of the real growing problems we have, and this is the one that's really an intractable problem, going to be very difficult to solve, is that the breed has become overwhelmed with Native Dancer, Raise a Native, Mr. Prospector, and Danzig blood. These are all stallions. And there's a lot of unsoundness transmitted through these lines. 8 Bells has a triple cross of Raise a Native blood in her, or had in her. And he was an unsound horse. He only raced 4 times. He was a son of Native Dancer, who was unsound. And it just goes on. And I think that she inherited the weak ankles of Raise a Native. That's where he had problems.
What should the sport do? Sorry to cut you off, but if you could wave a magic wand, what's the one thing you would do about horse racing to fix it?
Boy, first of all, you know, it's almost impossible to deal with the pedigree problem because it's all around us. And it's just gotten out of hand. But the other thing is I would ban anabolic steroids and I would ban corticosteroids, or at least not allow people to use them while a horse is actively in training and actively running. Cortisone is injected into the joints, and it it's an anti-inflammatory, and it allows horses to run without pain when in fact they're injured. And this is a very dangerous practice Because if you keep doing it repeatedly, a horse is going to blow a wheel. And this has happened on many occasions.
And your column calls 8 Bell's death, you write it this way, a wrenching moment of crisis and self-examination. Now, William, we are out of time. We appreciate your time. We'll see your column on ESPN.com, and thanks for joining us on Outside the Lines.
Thank you.
And again, you can log on right now to ESPN.com and take a look at a searing column from the great William Knack.
Today, the formula for the best market.
And you say the Lakers are the most likely road team to win an NBA playoff game. I'm Steve Bunin. Thanks for watching. That does it for us on Outside the Lines.